All right, so I have to start off with a howdy because I'm at A&M and I'm down the road, so might as well start off with a howdy. So howdy. Howdy. Okay, y'all are much better than the students. I said that to the students. They looked at me like, what are you saying? So I'm so glad that you're here this afternoon. More importantly, I'm glad that I have an opportunity. I feel like I'm talking to the choir. I say that because when we start thinking about the work that we do, we recognize that we have a huge responsibility as instructors. And I'm assuming all of y'all are instructors, right? The majority of instructors, some practitioners, I'm sure as well. So I feel like I'm speaking to the choir because obviously as a fellow instructor, I actually live it and walk it. I was teaching last night. I taught last night. I'm going to teach tomorrow. I teach a class on Monday nights. On Monday nights, I teach a advanced student development theory course focusing on how students develop while in college. And I have a cohort of about 17 students who are in student affairs and are going to work in future in higher education. And Magdalena Mendoza is one of those students that I had as a professor. So it's nice to see my students actually taking my class, graduating, and now having a full-time job. So thank you, Magdalena, for a wonderful opportunity to come and speak to all of you. And I say that because I really want you to have what I consider a conversation with me. A couple of things about me that you kind of get to know. Number one, I don't sit behind a podium. Number two, I speak really fast. And number three, I'm really passionate. And I'm really passionate because it's important for you to understand why am I doing this and why am I here today. I say that because I take a huge responsibility in terms of thinking about how does research inform our practice. When I think about the work that I do, I really don't want to think the research that I conduct sits some stale journal and nobody reads it. I really believe in this notion of, and this is really the conceptual idea of this whole talk today, is how do we take theory and put it into practice? And more importantly, I want you to walk away from this conversation, and I really want to have a conversation, where you start thinking about how you conduct and engage with your students. Particularly when we talk about students who are, in my mind, a changing demographic. And we'll talk about that in greater detail. And I say that as well because when we start thinking about what responsibilities we have a huge responsibility. And I'll go into greater detail because what I really believe I want to start today is a catalyst is something larger. A catalyst is something I think is more important. So I'm going to give you a lot of information. I'm going to give you a lot of what I consider nuggets that you can take away from and more importantly use to think about how you conduct the work that you do. And more importantly, how do you start, and this is what I think is really critical, how do you start creating a culture of evidence and what it means to be an instructor in the community college level? How do you create a culture of evidence that you're making a difference? And what does a culture of evidence look like as an instructor? So in other words, how do you know that you're meeting the mark with students? How do you know, beyond student evaluations, how do you know that you're actually engaging with students in a way that's actually considered an authentic learning experience? And so I say this because not only do I believe this is important for you as an instructor, this is something I do research in. I actually teach a course called College Teaching. And so I spend 15 weeks, and I'm about to give you 15 weeks in about 45 minutes. So hang on to your seats. I was like, nope, I can't put that in. Nope, I can't put that in. Nope, that's too much. So I'm going to try to do it as fast as possible, but more importantly, be a catalyst. A catalyst for you to start thinking about creating a culture of evidence because I don't know who's in the room right now. Social sciences. Is social sciences in the room? So a couple of social sciences. Math, physical sciences, math. A couple of mathematicians, all right, great. I teach an intro stats course, right? Humanities, any humanities? English, humanities, a couple of humanities folks, wonderful. This is great because what I want to tell you is that what I'm going to be talking about today has nothing to do by disciplinary specifics. I say that because I had an opportunity to give talks to other professors on A&M's campus, and I gave a presentation similar to this tone to the physics department. And the physics department said, why do we need to have this person talk about students of color in physics? Physics is physics is physics. What are you talking about? And after 45 minutes, they saw the bigger picture. They had an aha moment. I did the same talk for mathematicians, mathematics. Math is math is math. And I try to provide them the evidence about why it's important to think about not just the actual material, but more critically, the idea of what does it mean to be engaged in authentic learning with students. And so today we're going to have a conversation about that. And hopefully you get a sense of where I'm coming from. And more critically, you start to understand the value of what I'm trying to get to you, so that I want to try to keep it at the bottom shelf. Keep it accessible. So I'm not going to try to use big jargon. I'm just trying to give you what I consider evidence-based teaching practice. Evidence of teaching practice. In other words, these are things that have been studied, have been looked at, and I'm hoping to have that conversation. And so I start off with this really simple title: Know Their Name. Know Their Name: Developing a Student-Centered Learning Class Environment for Students of Color. And when we start thinking about this, I just finished having a conversation with someone, the advisor. What's your name again? Brenda. And she was telling me that there's 9,000 students, and about 9,000 of those students, 4,000 are Latinos. And so that's only happening, and we're going to talk about that in a great deal, with the demographic reality of that looks like and what that means. And so I'm at A&M. I've been there now. This is the beginning of my 6th year. I've been a faculty member now at another institution. This is my 13th year as a faculty member. So I've been engaged in this work for quite a number of years, and I've been teaching for quite a number more. Here's my Twitter account. I just found out I have a Twitter, so I have a good Twitter account. So if you want to tweet, go right ahead. I just checked, because the students didn't tweet. But the president, I don't know if the president's in the room right now. I think it's Nut. Oh, yes, the president. She just followed me. So welcome, President. Thank you. And so I'm kind of like famous now that the president's following me. I was like, oh my gosh. So I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. So I say that because, and it's important because here's the thing. We have to think about how, and this is really what it boils down to, how we're creating a narrative around what we do as educational institutions. When we start thinking about creating a narrative, it begins with an understanding of what our responsibility is. And so let's start off with this. Thank you. Thank you to Lone Star Tomball for inviting me to be a kickoff. And I was told that because that was the kickoff, I set the bar pretty high. Good. I'm glad that the bar is high, because I think it's important for us these conversations. Thank you for Ms. Magdalena Mendoza, who was my former student and actually had the courage to ask me to come and say, would you give a talk? I said, absolutely, anything for you. But more importantly, this is something that I do as part of my service to the state of Texas, to higher education. I'm going to be going next week to Ohio. I'm going to be going to University of Michigan, where I did my PhD. And the University of Michigan asked me to give a talk on this topic, on how is diversity in education, and more important, diversity in learning happening in Texas. I'm part of a larger research grant. I'm going to talk a little bit about that later on. And so having an opportunity to do this and having Magdalena invite me is really an honor to share that with you. The faculty members who are here today, thank you for being here. You could be a lot of different places. Now listen, I know, because I'm a faculty member and I have 27 things that people are asking me to do all the time, every day. So the fact that you're here, I almost feel like I'm kind of like shocked. So thank you for being here, and hopefully I can make it worth your while. And then obviously the administrators. President, thank you very much once again for being here, but more importantly, to show the support. Because in my mind, I think it's important to recognize that when we have leadership that invests in your professional development, to bring you here to talk to someone who's a leader in talking about this research really is a testimony to their commitment to learners. And so when we start thinking about that, we start to realize, I did my homework. I said, so what is the Lone Star System's vision? To help people improve their lives through learning. And so I said, well, that's really amazing. We can break that down a little bit, what that means, through learning. And so when it's part of your vision statement, through learning, then it's front and center about the responsibility you have as a professor. It's front and center that you're engaging in the act of learning. The positioning, to all who seek something better, Lone Star College is a source of opportunity that connects them to a better future. Connections. I want you to keep that, because that's going to be a theme. When I was reading that, I was preparing for this talk, I really started thinking about connection as being what I think, a metaphor to what we're going to be doing with these students. How do we connect them? Personality. Approachable. inspiring, engaging? How many faculty, don't point fingers, how many faculty, no faculty that are everything not that, who are challenged, who are in the trenches and don't see the light and don't recognize that their job is to be approachable. Their job is to be inspiring. President, you could have closed your ears and eyes. I'm sorry. There are some that are like that because I have them in my institution. I have faculty that have been there for forever and a day, are not approachable, are not inspiring, are not engaging. So when you have that, what does that look like for a student of color? What does that look like for students who are the first in their family to go to college? And more importantly, what does that suggest about us as practitioners? When we start thinking about this, how many people are in a relationship? Anybody in a relationship? All right, any kind of relationship. This wasn't a trick question. Any kind of relationship. All right, good. I'm going to give you a trick questions. All right, so I'm in a relationship too, and I get it. I'm in all kinds of relationships. And you know the story. When we talk about being approachable, inspiring, engaging, when we talk about relationships, you always hear the adage, you have to be 50-50. Right? Now, you all know that's a lie. Because sometimes it's not 50-50. Sometimes it's 60-40. Math, help me out here. 70-30. 80-20. So when I'm talking to you, here's this. Too often, as instructors and as institutions, and you can quote me on this and you can tweet this all you want because this is the way I think about it. Too often, institutions expect students to be college ready, when in reality, colleges need to be student ready. And so when you're being student ready, that means sometimes you can't meet them at 50% and say, hey, come on over to my side. Let me show you what a great professor I am. Come on to me. Let me help you. When in reality, you're going to have some students that you need to go 60, 70, 80, 90% of the way to help them, to give them the encouragement, to give them the sense that you are approachable, that you are inspiring, and that you are engaging them. Because if you don't, the very first narrative that they're going to have in their mind is this: I knew it. I'm not college material. It's a waste of time. I am not college ready. When in reality, we're student ready. So this is part of your community and the affiliation. Smart people going places. I'm really happy to see this. When I was reading this and learning about this, I was like, I'm pretty excited about this because there are a lot of smart people in this room, way smarter than I am, and more committed than I am to working with students who, for a lot of them, this is their Harvard. I give talks all over the country, and I've given talks to students at community colleges, and I actually did the commencement speech for Tarrant County at the Fort Worth Coliseum. My largest crowd had 15,000 people, and I was the commencement speaker. And I gave the speech, and I was talking to some students prior to the speech, and I kind of put their names into the speech, literally like right before. And one of them came up to me and said, yeah, I said, what's your name? What are you graduating? He says, I'm the first to graduate from college in my family. I am the first one. I am a college graduate, sir. I said, I am so proud of you. That's amazing. What'd you get your degree in? Culinary arts. I'm going to be a chef. That's his Harvard. That is his Harvard. So I'm telling you now, smart people going places. Do you have the right mindset of encouraging these students to believe in themselves, to be college graduates? That mindset isn't something that happens with disciplinary knowledge. And we're going to talk about that today. And we're going to talk about that because I think it's important for you to recognize that more than anything, you're going to learn something about yourself more than you're going to learn about the practice of teaching tonight. That's what I'm going to help you with. This is not about me telling you tips and tricks about what it means to be a good professor. It's more about looking at yourself, about what role do you play in facilitating learning for your students who think this is their Harvard. I gave a talk at MIT in March. And I'm working with MIT on a research project. And I'm working on a project with them on men of color. And I said, MIT, you're the very best of the best. People die to come here. And everybody who applies here has a 95% or higher on the SAT. So why are your men of color only graduating 82%? They're the best of the best. So that tells you something. Even when you have the very best and the brightest in our country, they still are not being successful in institutions that say they're the best. So whether it's Lone Star Tomball, whether it's MIT, we have some work to do. So today is what I'm going to try to help you understand the big picture. Today is what I'm trying to help you, and really what it boils down to is creating a new narrative. I told you we're going to talk about narratives. And why do I say a narrative? Because a narrative is the manner in which a social issue is framed, defined, not only determines the scope of its stakeholders, but more importantly, its solutions. And so here's what I'm saying. If we're going to create a narrative about what it means for college student success in the college setting, in the classroom, we need to have stakeholders. And if you don't have the right stakeholders, like the president who's in this room, if you don't have the right stakeholders, like the administrators that endorse this speaking series, if you don't have the right stakeholders, then you can't have the right solutions. You can't make the right solutions. So I'm engaged with you because I want to try to create a new narrative, an ongoing narrative about what Tomball is doing. What does creating a new narrative look like? Well, the reality is when you start thinking about the Hispanic population in the United States, the new narrative is that in 1980, they only represented 6.4, in 1990, 9%, in 2000, 12.5, and in 2012, and now it's even higher, at 17%. They're the fastest growing, 54 million and growing. The research says that on average, year after year, 600,000, almost a million students turn 18 are Latino. In fact, in the state of Texas, in the K-12 system, it's majority Latino now, over 50%. So Tomball plays a critical role in that, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. When we talk about, in Texas, 15.4% or 11.8 million make up Texas. It's the largest ethnic group, by now, the largest ethnic group in the state of Texas. And I didn't know this when I was doing the slide, did the slides a few years ago, and I put this, I didn't know this. I said, Harris County, where's that? I didn't know that. And then I said to myself, oh my gosh, that's like here. Did you know that Harris County is the second largest Latino population in the United States? Harris County, by census data. And so when you start thinking about that, I make the argument when I gave this talk at Texas A&M, and I give talks all over the state of Texas, and I said, you know what, Texas A&M, and I'm a faculty member at Texas A&M, I said, we have the largest population of Latinos 90 minutes from us, and Texas A&M, and here's what it boils down to, it's going to happen to you as well, I'm just letting you know, you're going to become a Hispanic serving institution not by design, but by default. So this train's coming down the track whether you like it or not. So it raises a particular question. Am I ready as an institution to be student ready for the demographic reality that we're going to be dealing with? You're not going to be a Hispanic serving institution by design. It's going to be by default. And so consequently, when you start thinking about that, you see these empty chairs. They're going to be being filled by Latino students. And the state basically says, the state basically has a policy unit. And the policy unit basically said, look, we have to have a plan. 60 by 30. Anybody know about 60 by 30? Anybody heard of that before? 60 by 30. I know the president has, right? Absolutely. And 60 by 30 is a pretty big deal because here is what the coordinating board said. The coordinating board for higher education policy in the state of Texas that says, look, if you're going to be in higher education, which you all are in, this is the policy arm of Texas. They basically, 60 by 30 says, look, by 2030, at least 60% of Texans ages 25 to 34 will have some type of certificate or degree by 2030. Okay, where are we now? 2017, math, 13, right? 12 and a half, right? 12 and a half-ish, right? 12 and a half years. Anybody know the current number of that population demographic that have a degree? Anybody have a guess? I told you this is going to be quiz time. Anybody give me a number? 25? Anybody else? 40? Okay, that's good. Keep going. It's 34. 34%. So in the next 12 and a half years, we have to go, you follow me, you see the math now. We got to go 16 percentage points. Right? Right? Is that right? No, 26 percentage points. See, I told y'all math. 26, right? See? And so what that means, or what that tells me, it's 26. That time we have 13 years. We have to go roughly 2 percentage points every year. So your institution is going to play a critical role in the bottom line of how we should have more people to earn some type of certificate or college degree, credential. Yes?
When you said the 34% was that also with the certificate?
Yes. That's basically, listen, in fact, the
certificates would seem a little easier.
Oh, yeah. And listen, they have to reframe what they mean by college completion. And the way the federal government now and the way the state of Texas is doing it, they're defining college completion a certificate. So somebody sits and takes a 9-credit certificate class or 12-credit certificate class, and they get a certificate. That's considered college completion in the state's eyes and the federal government's eyes. That's how the federal government, President Obama's administration, had defined what college completion is. Okay? So that's a pretty big deal, because we're still not, even when you include that, it would have been even lower if we didn't include certificates, to give you some perspective. And I know y'all have certificate programs, right, President? All community colleges do, as a matter of fact. So if that's the case, Texas higher education has a new goal. So in 2014, here we go, 40%, when you start including masters and all that, it's 40%. Y'all see that? And we need to get to 60%. I wasn't even counting the master. We're just talking about the bachelor, and we're still not even there. We're still off by 20%. And so it raises a particular question about how do we get there from here? And more importantly, what role do you play in that? We'll talk about that in greater detail. And so here's where it really gets kind of sad and kind of scary at the same time. When you take a closer look at academic degree completion in the state of Texas in comparison to the rest of the country, educational attainment, and this is all from this. All this is coming from the coordinating board, the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board. This is their report, the almanac. Every year they have an almanac. If you want to, you can Google Coordinating Board Almanac, and these are the numbers that come straight from there. And I'm just giving you the cheat sheet for that. And basically they're saying Texas ranks 18th in the country in educational attainment for people who have some college or no degree. So they attended college, about 18th in the country. We rank 44th in the country. That's considered the lower, bottom half. 44th in associate degree completion. 44th. 28th when we think about bachelor's degrees. And 30th when we think about graduate and professional degrees. So when you look at these numbers, you either can be depressed or realistic about how Texas sees the importance of what we're trying to do when we think about 60 by 30. And so they basically said, look, by the way, do y'all like these graphics really? Good, okay, right? Texas, right? Oil field, right, okay, here. Right. I just moved to Texas. And they told me that I need to have 3 things to be a Texan. Number 1, I need to have boots. Number 2, I need to have a belt buckle the size of a satellite dish. And number 3, I have to have a truck. So far, I'm 0 for 3. So I need to work on my wardrobe, my car, and my wardrobe, right? But Texas Coordinating Board said, look, without bold action, Texas faces a future of diminished incomes, opportunity, and resources. This is an economic reality. That if we're going to be creating the next generation of an educated workforce, it all begins with community colleges, four-year institutions, and K-12 engaged in what we consider a crisis that we just need to. So they basically said, look, let's take a closer look here. In 2004, they had 100 students in this Texas education system. And of those 100 students, only 68 graduated from public higher education. That's about on the low end in the nation, 68% graduation rate. It's actually like 72 when you include private and homeschool. Of those public school students, of the original 100, only 54 actually go to college. Of those 54, only 20 get a degree. So of the original 100 of the 8th graders, only 20 actually receive some kind of degree or certificate, to answer your question about certificates. 80% of the students that started in the 8th grade never ever finished any kind of college credential, post-secondary credential. Let me wrap your head around that. 80%. And so when you start thinking about that and you start recognizing what that means, you start recognizing something really, really kind of scary. Only one receives a certificate. 4 of those 20 receive some kind of associate's degree, and 15 receive some bachelor's degree or higher. I do a lot of work in gender differences, and I'm going to tell you right now, the men of color are abysmal in their academic achievement. I spend a lot of time talking about that. They are abysmal. And so this raises a particular question. When we start thinking about the Texas population and enrollment, and you start thinking about who makes up what, Hispanics now in 2015, almost 40% of the population and growing, and yet only 5% difference of them not actually being enrolled. So we have a lot of students that never finish high school, never enroll in college, and never get a college degree. And so you're probably wondering, well, who's participating? Well, here's the reality. In 2015, this is the most recent one, 0 to 17-year-olds, what does this number say? Hispanics, 50%. They're coming, in 0 to 17, they're coming into your college campuses. And it raises a particular question, what we're going to do. How are we going to deal with this? What's going to happen? And more importantly, what responsibility? And when we take a look at 25 and older, who's earning the degrees and who's not, you can start seeing the challenge. I like to point out this here. For the math folks, help me out here. 26 and 37, right? What's that? What's that number? 64%. Okay, good. 64% have high school or less. 25 years older. This is even crazier. Almost 40%, 4 out of 10 don't even have a high school degree for Hispanics. And yet, they're the fastest growing. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to see the correlation about what responsibility we have as an institution to address this issue. The fact is, our national and state economic prosperity and future generations of an educated workforce requires that we enroll and graduate more students of color through Texas post-secondary institutions. That's just a reality that Texas has to accept if we're going to be, as they talk about, taking bold action. And so, here we are. So by now, this is about the time in my speech, in my talk, where you look at me and say, man, you really are bumming me out. How many people feel bummed out a little bit right now, right? You're like, dude, really? You're kind of like a downer, Debbie Downer here, right? It's not enough for me to just give you information about becoming a great instructor without giving you the context. I just gave you the context. I think it's important for you to see the context because in reality, when students come to your classroom and when students come to your campus, and we talk about being student ready, a lot of them see this. They see this behind me. And when they see this, they ask themselves, am I college ready? Am I a college student? The fact is, college teaching, are we building blocks or building walls? And I want to believe that we're going to need to start building blocks or foundations. Look at this picture and see a foundation, not a wall. So what role as a college instructor are you playing in creating a building block, a foundation for these students to stand on, or building a wall? I know as well as you do that there's some faculty members that like to build walls and like to create blocks for students. And it reminds us that we have a huge responsibility because we have a lot of students coming to our campus. And for us, when we start talking about why teaching is important, why even get into the conversation of instruction, we need to start asking ourselves, well, wait a minute. Are we dealing with dependent students that are passive and have no self-confidence? Are we dealing with that sometimes? How many people feel like that's what we're dealing with? Right? Are we dealing with some students that have no self-confidence? I make the argument that when we start having conversations about instruction and college education and college completion and all that, we really are quick to create what I consider, here's what it boils down to, a deficit-based narrative about our students. A deficit-based narrative that says, it's not me, it's you. And because of you, I can't help you. I just have to try to fix you as best as possible. And I want to create a different narrative because I told you it's all about narratives. I want to think about being an asset-based narrative. So an asset-based narrative says, what kind of resilience did you have to even step foot on Harvard's campus? Did y'all catch that? This is Harvard. This is their Harvard. What kind of courage did it take for you to enroll in a developmental math class? How hard was that for you when in math they just pushed you along in the K-12 system? More importantly, how incredibly courageous are you to go to college when you're the oldest of 6 and you still have to be at home helping your mom and dad who are working 2 and 3 jobs? Know their name. Know their name. The research clearly indicates the number one thing in helping students be successful in a college class is to know their name. I practice that in all of my courses. And I call them by name. And even if I forget their name, I admit it. I forgot your name. Tell me your name again. You're important to me. Because for a lot of them, they lack the self-confidence. They lack the ability to think, hey, how do we do this? Because we want to teach courses that encourage student intellectual maturity and autonomy, don't we? Let me get a show of hands. Is that what we want our students to have? Wouldn't it be awesome? Wouldn't it be awesome if we had students to be encouraged to have an intellectual maturity and autonomy? Self-directed learners. So if we have this, but we want this, we're missing something, aren't we? Right? And that's what I'm trying to help you kind of address and talk about over the next few more minutes. All right? I told you 15 weeks, 1 45-minute presentation. Here's the deal. There's some new paradigms for college teaching. The old paradigm is knowledge is transferred. We have passive learners. The old paradigm says students strive to complete the assignments as that's all they want to do. And more important, the faculty holds the power. And what we're going to do is norm reference, it's reductionist, and we want to just drill and practice. And any expert can teach, right? That's the old paradigm. The research says the new paradigm, dealing with students of color and what I consider millennials, the new paradigm flips that. The new narrative says we need to have knowledge jointly created. We need to have active students. We need to create lifelong learning. We need to think about diversity. We need to think about criterion referenced. We need to talk about empowering the students. We need to talk about problem solving. When we start thinking about what the new paradigm looks like and what that looks like for all the disciplines, then it raises a particular question about why we do what we do as instructors. Because at the end, remember when I said in your vision statement there was talk about connects, right? Connects? This is the visual. When I was developing this slide, I was looking for this visual. This is a bridge. What responsibility do you have to build a bridge for students who lack self-confidence to become self-directed learners? What responsibility do you have? And more importantly, what are the roots for learning-centered teaching to build those bridges? The research basically says if you're going to be doing learning-centered teaching, here are the roots that you need to have. The bottom line is this isn't teaching that features pedagogical showmanship, teacher performance, but rather about a student's learning and teachers making the contributions that help that learning happen. This isn't about being a sage on the stage, but being a guide on the side and empowering the students through the co-production of knowledge. What does that mean? What does that look like? And what does that mean when you have students who lack the confidence and are looking for you or looking at you to empower them to be self-directed learners? We're going to talk about that in a minute. And so there are some elements. And I show you this picture because every day you're going to have to make time. That's why the little stop clock there is. You're going to have to make time doing some of these key elements. This idea of engaging. How are you engaging with your students? You need to ask yourself on a daily basis, how am I engaging authentically with our students? How are you engaging them by asking their name? How are you engaging them by asking them how are they doing? What are their classes they're taking? I'm not asking you to reach out to a 200-person class. But I am asking you to make students who do want to ask for help know that you're available and willing to engage. How are you motivating, empower them? Does your syllabus create elements that motivate the students and empower the students to be part of the learning? I just spent an hour ago, a 45-minute session empowering and motivating students about why it's important for them to be a college graduate. What are you doing in your class that helps them see the link between your course and the larger narrative about being a college graduate? How are you engaging them? Because I'll tell you, I do a lot of work with STEM, and I spend a lot of time talking about creating authentic learning experiences. And one of the biggest things that the students complain about, it says, why am I taking a college algebra class? Because I don't see the connection to the bigger picture. I don't see why English is something I need to worry about when we talk about communication skills. I don't see, because you have to draw the picture for them. Remember about the 50-50? That's when you need to go 60 and 70% to help them recognize what we're trying to do. Encourages collaboration. And when I talk about collaboration, I'll talk about two forms of collaboration. I'll talk about vertical collaboration and horizontal collaboration. Vertical collaboration means that I have students verbally and actively collaborate with me in the classroom. I call it co-teaching exercises. And so what I do is, I did this yesterday. I have an exam on Thursday with my students. And we had an exam review yesterday for 35 juniors and seniors in a class that I teach called Diversity in the Workplace. And we talked about microaggression. Y'all familiar with that term? I could do a whole thing on microaggression. We don't have time for that. But we had talked about microaggression. And I told them, I said, so who can tell me what microaggression is? And they all were looking down. They're all looking down. I said, Teresa, why don't you come on up? Teresa was terrified. But Teresa came up, and I said, Teresa, let's role play. Tell me, what do you think microaggression looks like? And we had a conversation. We collaborated and empowered. And so I have an assignment that I do, a requirement that I do for all of my classes. I don't wait till student evaluations. I have what I call 1-minute papers. At the end of each class, everybody heard about 1-minute papers? At the end of each class, every class that I do, I said, tell me what we did well, what we need to improve on, and what's the most important thing you learned. Every class. And Teresa came up and she writes on there. That's how I keep attendance, by the way. They have to put their name on it. And they can't do it till the end of the class. And Teresa said, I was really nervous, but thank you for bringing me up because I understand now the concept of microaggression better than I ever did before. Thank you. That's vertical. Horizontal collaboration is this peer learning. When you're a guide on the side, learning does not occur simply by you using didactic approach. How are you empowering students to engage in learning on a near-peer basis? The research clearly indicates when you have near-peer education, near-peer learning, learning increases exponentially. So near-peer means I do a think, pair, share exercise. Near-peer means this is the coolest thing. If y'all haven't done this, it's the coolest thing. And President, your budget may go off the rails for this, right? But here's the coolest thing. I ended up buying dry erase poster boards. Poster boards that are dry erasable. And I assign a poster board to each of the tables. And then I tell them, when they have readings, tell me what's the most interesting thing you learned from reading the material for today's class. And give me the page number. And each group of pods of students went around. We have about 40 students, 35 students. Each pod ended up doing that. And students said, I never really thought about when that table said that was something that I read when I read it. I could have talked for 2 hours on the topic on what I thought was important, but they learned more listening to other students. Horizontal collaboration, near-peer learning. It's not about you. Learning occurs between students. Promotes personal reflection. This idea that you're engaging with them by asking them questions that make meaning to them. How are you personalizing the material to them? Well, people say, well, what does that mean? Well, promoting personal reflection means how do we encourage students to know who are some of the leaders in that field that look like them? How are we encouraging students to know who was the first African American physicist? How are students going to know if they can't reflect on what we are talking about in a meaningful way? And then, of course, explicit learning skills instructions, which I do a lot of. This idea that when we talk about, this is really important that you start recognizing this. I'm giving an exam tomorrow, and I have mandatory, as part of the exam, mandatory, you have to have a study guide. Mandatory. You can use the study guide for the exam, but you have to have a study guide, and you have to turn it in with your exam. And it's mandatory. Some of the students says, no professor's ever asked us to do that. I said, well, I'm having you do that because I'm forcing you to develop learning skills on how to be successful in this class. And I told them, you'll get 10 points off your final grade. If you make 100 on the exam, you're going to get 10 points taken off if you don't turn in a study guide. You got to turn it in. How do you empower the learner? How do you empower them and they can use that study guide for the material? Yes, sir?
But the study guide is just something that they make.
Whatever they make. Whatever they want. Whatever they want. Listen, I'm of the mindset, I'm not here to talk about memorization. I'm here talking about application. And so the teaching that I do, I strongly believe that I'd rather have students struggle with application than memorization. When I started out teaching, I was that crazy professor. I just got out of Michigan. I was like, I'm crazy. They're going to, and that was my psycho self that I said, it's called memorization. Then I realized I'm missing the boat on what students are learning. How do we focus, instead of the old paradigm of rote memorization, to the new paradigm about application, right? And so we finish with this idea that sometimes we're in the weeds. And I want to get you out of the weeds as an instructor. Y'all like this picture? Weeds, right? We're in the weeds sometimes. And when we're in the weeds, it's kind of hard to see the focus on the quality of student learning. Let's focus on not the quantity of student learning, but the quality of student learning. Because when we're in the weeds, we kind of forget the reality is that we challenge students to significant kinds of learning. How do we challenge them to different types of learning? Application, integration. We'll talk about that in a moment. How do we use active forms of learning? I can spend an entire work seminar session on this slide alone. I'm just giving you the tidbits of it. Teachers that care about students as subject matter. Teachers that care about students as subject matter means that you understand the connection between the learner and the material, especially if they're students of color. Teachers that interact well with students. One of the number one things students tell about me when I do 1 minute paper is, and you'll get it now, wow, you're very enthusiastic. Wow, you're so enthusiastic. And I get that. I'm very enthusiastic. I'm very passionate. I get that. And that doesn't mean that an introverted professor who's kind of shy can't be that. I don't want an introvert. I'm not asking an introverted professor to become a superstar thespian on the stage. I'm not asking to do that. Because the second thing that they tell me is probably the one that I like the most. It's the one I'm asking all of you to think about that really matters to them. The second thing that they say after that is something that I think all of us need to inspire to be. And that is, Dr. Ponjuan, I really believe that you actually care about me. Do you want your students to feel that you care about them? There are a lot of students at A&M, the best of the best in the state of Texas, that tell me, you just seem to care. You actually know my name. I was walking up to the office yesterday, and one of my students, Elle, is her name, was walking down the sidewalk. I said, "Hey, Elle, how are you doing?" She thought I must have had a horn come out of my head, and I was like some alien out of outer space that just landed in front of her, because she was blown away that I knew her name, and she was blown away that I acknowledged her. And invariably, there's no magic to being a great instructor when you show that you care. How are you showing that you care about your students? What are you doing in the classroom, outside of the classroom, that shows that you care? Students don't care how much you know. Students don't care how well you speak. Students care that you care about them. So when you're talking about A&M students who are the best of the best, and you talk about a Tomball student who sees this as their Harvard, are you showing them that you care? Because when we talk about interaction, that's what we're talking about, showing them that they care. Give them a good feedback and good assessment and transparency in their grading are all key elements. Like I said, I spend an entire section on just that slide there, on what is assessment and evaluation and the critical need of transparency and grading and everything that involves with that, and giving students sense of empowerment in the grading system. There's an entire literature base on student empowerment and evaluation. It's a fascinating concept. How do you empower students in the grading process? Case in point, I'm giving this exam tomorrow. They were blown away. I give essay exams. I give case study application essays for my classes. And I give them an exam, and I said, you have to take essay exams, and you have to answer short answers and long answers. For the short answers, I'm going to give you 3. You pick 2. They thought I gave them the winning lottery numbers, tickets. You mean what? You mean I don't have to answer all 3? I said, no. Pick 2 of the 3. Oh, and for the long essays, I'm going to give you 2. Pick 1. A very simple task to empower the learner. Am I asking you to lower your standards? Absolutely not. Am I asking you to change your standards? Absolutely not. Am I asking to show students that you care by empowering them? I absolutely am. And so when we finish up, we need to start thinking about the larger notion of taxonomy significant learning. And so this first box, there are 6 of them. And so if you want to, when you write this down, I want you to create 3 boxes on the top and 3 boxes directly underneath. So total 6 boxes. And so this is the first one, foundational knowledge, foundational learning. And Magdalena probably remembers all this by now. I'm sure Magdalena's having a little flashback here. But this is the box that we most are obsessed with. This is the box that most people are obsessed with because this box represents subject matter competency. How well do the students know the material? And I make the argument this is not a zero-sum game. That by having them focusing solely on foundational knowledge, or what I call the subject matter competency, is not at the expense of other things. Fact of the matter is, when we start thinking about this, it's understanding, remembering information, and ideas. That's what I consider the base. But I want to go 5 levels deeper than that when you start thinking about this. And I say this because I'm not just talking about this. I practice this in all the classes that I teach. So what does that mean? That means that at the very beginning, at the very basics, you're going to learn the foundational knowledge and develop a new language for the material. I talk about creating a new vocabulary. But what good is it to know the vocabulary? And I use the example of a hammer. Everybody know what a hammer is? Right? Everybody seen a hammer before, right? You know what a hammer is. So I'm going to tell you about the hammer and all the different parts of the hammer. And so you'll know what a hammer does. But what good is it to know what a hammer is if you don't know where to apply it, where to use the hammer? Application. I say you have to know the hammer and you have to know when to use the hammer. Some students try to use a hammer when they need a screwdriver. But they don't know why they even have the hammer and why the hammer is being used. And so we need to spend a lot of time and this is what I call, this is a taxonomy, or what I like to call the learning outcomes of a course, also known as the learning outcomes. So I have 6 learning outcomes that capture the essence of what we want students to do. I want to be able to have students know that there's a hammer, when to use the hammer, application, and then this is talked back to the curriculum. How does the hammer align with integration, the other courses in the curriculum? How does the hammer work with a course that talks about screwdrivers and a course that talks about pliers? And how do they know when to use the hammer, the screwdriver, and the pliers together to build the house? How do we integrate it into the larger curriculum? President, that's something that talks about this notion of curriculum design. I could spend the whole time talking about curriculum design on how we connect the courses in a curriculum to address this issue. Okay? So these are the top 3. Okay? The top 3, on the side of that top 3, or right along here, like around the paper, right here, you need to put you, Y-O-U. This section of the course is all about you understanding what the hammer is, when to use a hammer, and how to use a hammer in relation to the other skills that you're going to learn in the rest of the curriculum. That's the you piece. But the bottom part is all the other part, the we, which is the bottom 3, the we. And the we part says, how are we helping students talk to other people, others, the human dimension, about the hammer? Can someone explain what the hammer is to another college student? Can they explain the hammer to another professor who's also a hammer expert? How are we empowering them to develop the human dimension of communication about their understanding of the hammer? Number 4, 5, caring. How are you encouraging them to care about the topic and make them understand the importance of the topic so that they can become self-directed learners and developing new feelings and interests and values based on the hammer? And they realize, wow, there are different types of hammers. I want to learn about this hammer, and I want to learn about that hammer. How are you empowering them to start caring about the material? You can't do that if you can't have them trust you and develop rapport and show that you care. So I spend a lot of time trying to say, hey, find out what you're interested in and let me help you. Because if you care about something, you're more likely to be invested in being successful. And then finally, the last outcome that I want to achieve is learning how to learn and becoming a self-directed lifelong learner, where they start becoming a better student because they want to inquire about a subject even more. In other words, are we planting seeds in students to becoming better learners by being self-directed? If all we focus on in a course is that first block of subject matter competency and memorization, we've lost our students. We call that passive learners, where all they're doing is what I call plug and chug. All they're doing is trying to memorize and leave the course and say no one got hurt. When in reality, we have a larger responsibility to encourage these students to become able to apply it, to integrate it, to talk about it, to care about it, and to become lifelong learners. I want to close with this. When we talk about this work, and I said this is about students of color, this applies to everyone, not just students of color, right? Does that make sense? Not just Latinos. This applies to everyone. But I like to say this concept. What's your name? Fernando. Fernando, you and I go to the emergency room. And Fernando, you have a stomach ache, and I have a chest pains. Who's the doctor going to see first? Me. Why? Why me? Because I'm good looking? No, because I'm more critical. Does that make sense? For a lot of the students that come into our campus, they have chest pains because they don't know that they belong here. And we treat them like they all have stomach aches. I make the argument like this. Too often we hear the commentary or the narrative that, well, we helped all students. I speak a lot, and I hear this, we help all students. And if we help all students, then all students of color will succeed because we're helping all students. I said, man, that's really deep. That's really powerful. I said, sort of like the analogy of the metaphor of when the high tide rolls in, all the boats rise, right? Yeah, that's it. Our tides rise, so everybody succeeds, right? I said, that's wonderful, but you're missing one flaw in that logic. A lot of the boats that Latino students are in, and male students of color, and African-American male students are in, have holes in their boats. So raise the tide all you want. The boats are still sinking. Stop treating stomach aches and start recognizing that every student that comes to your campus has a story to tell. Stop treating these students that they are all coming in with the same skill sets when they have some schools that don't even have AP course curriculum. Stop treating these students that they are college ready when we need to be student ready. It's important for you to see the bigger picture. And more importantly, it's critical to recognize what responsibility you have as an instructor. If it's easy, then anybody can be an instructor. But it's hard work. It's hard work because every day I get in front of my students and talk to them, I give it all. And I'm exhausted after the end of the day. But students invariably tell me on their 1-minute papers, yesterday when they said for the exam review, I said, your exam's going to be the hardest exam I've ever taken, but I feel like I'm the most prepared because I feel like you care about my success. It's easy to be an instructor. It's hard to be a caring instructor. I've just given you a snapshot of a larger conversation about what we should be doing as a community and as a fellow instructor. I hope today you have a better understanding of what responsibilities we have, giving the larger context of what we're having to deal with. I want to thank you so much for your time, and hopefully if you have questions, I'll open the floor for questions. Thank you very much.